My name is Elena Whitmore, and for as long as I can remember, I have lived in the narrow space between survival and loss, in that quiet, invisible boundary where a single breath can separate life from death, where a heartbeat can either continue or simply stop. Working as a trauma nurse in Chicago didn't just expose me to fear, it immersed me in it, baptized me in its cold, unforgiving reality, until I believed I had learned all its shapes, all its disguises, all its ways of breaking people without leaving visible scars. I had stood in operating rooms where time stretched into something unreal, watched surgeons fight against the inevitable with bloodied hands and clenched jaws, listened to machines dictate the fragile rhythm of human existence, and held the trembling fingers of patients who knew, long before anyone said the words out loud, that they were not going to make it. I thought I understood fear because I had seen it reflected in others, because I had learned how to stand steady while the world collapsed around someone else. But I was wrong. Painfully, completely wrong, because there is a difference between witnessing fear and becoming its target, between observing tragedy and realizing, in a single irreversible moment, that you are standing at the center of it. The day I boarded that flight to Seattle began like any other rare day off, carrying with it a quiet sense of purpose that felt almost unfamiliar after months of emotional exhaustion, and for once, my thoughts were not filled with the echoes of hospital corridors or the lingering faces of patients I couldn't save, but with something softer, something fragile and uncertain: hope. My father had survived a stroke just weeks earlier, and although the doctors had used careful, measured words to describe his recovery, I could hear what they weren't saying, could sense the unspoken possibility that things might never return to what they once were. We had never been close. Not in the way other families seemed to be, not in the easy, effortless way that allowed love to exist without hesitation, because years of silence, of misunderstandings left unresolved, had built walls between us that neither of us had known how to tear down. But the thought of losing him, of never having the chance to say what I had been too stubborn or too afraid to say, had settled into my chest like a quiet urgency I could no longer ignore. So I booked the flight without telling him, without telling anyone, holding on to the small, almost childish idea that I could walk through his door and surprise him, that maybe, just maybe, we could begin again. The airport was exactly as I expected it to be: crowded, noisy, filled with the overlapping lives of strangers moving in different directions yet somehow sharing the same space, and for a while, I let myself get lost in its normalcy, in the predictable rhythm of announcements and footsteps, in the comfort of knowing that nothing about this day was supposed to be extraordinary. I remember watching a little girl press her hands against the wide glass windows, her face lighting up as a plane taxied across the runway, and I remember thinking how strange it was that something so massive, so heavy, could lift itself into the sky, defying everything that should have held it down. At the time, it felt like a passing thought. Now, it feels like a warning I didn't understand. Boarding the plane was uneventful, almost forgettable, the kind of routine experience that blends into memory without leaving any distinct impression, and I took my seat with the quiet relief of someone who had spent too much time standing, adjusting my bag, fastening my seatbelt, letting out a slow breath as I prepared for the long hours ahead. The cabin smelled faintly of recycled air and something sterile, something artificial, and I closed my eyes for a moment, allowing myself to drift into that in-between state where thoughts soften and time begins to blur. That was when she appeared. At first, there was nothing remarkable about her. Just another flight attendant moving through the aisle with practiced efficiency, offering polite smiles, adjusting overhead compartments, performing the small, invisible tasks that keep everything running smoothly. But something about her presence lingered just a second longer than it should have. Something in the way her movements felt just slightly too deliberate, too controlled, as if she were holding something back, as if every step required more effort than it should. I didn't think much of it. Not yet. When she reached my row, she paused briefly, her hand hovering over my tray table before placing a napkin down with a motion so subtle it could have gone unnoticed, and for a moment, I assumed it was nothing more than routine, some minor service gesture that didn't require attention. But then I noticed her fingers, how they trembled, not violently, not enough to draw attention from anyone else, but enough that someone like me, someone trained to observe the smallest signs of distress, couldn't ignore it. It was the kind of tremor I had seen in patients right before something went wrong. The kind of tremor that meant something was not okay. Before I could say anything, before I could even fully process what I was seeing, she moved on, continuing down the aisle as if nothing had happened, leaving behind only that small, ordinary object resting on my tray. A napkin. It should have meant nothing. But something inside me shifted, a quiet instinct rising to the surface, urging me to look, to pay attention, to not dismiss what didn't make sense. So I unfolded it, and everything changed. The words were written hastily, the ink slightly smudged as if they had been pressed onto the paper with urgency rather than care, and for a brief, disorienting moment, my mind struggled to process them, to fit them into any kind of logical explanation that would make them less terrifying than they actually were. Pretend you are sick. Get off this plane immediately. I read it once, then again, and again, each time hoping the meaning would shift, that I would somehow misinterpret it, that there was a reasonable explanation waiting just beyond my understanding. But there wasn't. Because when I looked up, searching for the woman who had left it, I found her standing at the end of the aisle, her body angled slightly away, as if she were trying not to draw attention, but her eyes were locked onto mine. And in them, I saw something that made my chest tighten in a way I had never experienced before. Not annoyance, not confusion, fear. Raw, unfiltered fear. The kind that doesn't belong in controlled environments, the kind that doesn't exist without a reason. The kind that tells you something is about to happen. Something irreversible. She didn't smile. She didn't look away. She just stared, as if willing me to understand without saying another word. And in that moment, I realized something that sent a cold, creeping sensation down my spine. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a prank. This was a warning. For me. My first instinct should have been to react immediately, to stand up, to call for help, to do exactly what she had written without hesitation. But instead, I froze, caught between the part of me that recognized danger and the part that refused to believe it could be real, because accepting it meant accepting that I was no longer in control, that something larger, something unseen, had already begun to unfold around me. So I did what I had been trained to do in every crisis. I stayed. I observed. I waited. Because deep down, beneath the rising fear and the unanswered questions, there was something else, something stronger, something more dangerous. I needed to understand. And that need was the beginning of everything. I tried to act normal, but nothing felt normal anymore, as if the simple act of breathing had suddenly become something I had to think about, something deliberate and fragile, like any moment my body might forget how to do it on its own. The world around me hadn't changed, at least not on the surface. The plane was still filled with passengers settling into their seats, adjusting bags, scrolling through phones, exchanging quiet conversations that blended into a low, constant murmur. But beneath that ordinary noise, something else had taken shape, something invisible yet suffocating, pressing in from all sides until it felt like the air itself had grown heavier. Every sound became amplified in a way that made my skin prickle with unease. The steady hum of the engines vibrating through the cabin like a distant warning, the rustle of fabric as people shifted in their seats, the uneven breathing of strangers who, just minutes ago, had been nothing more than background figures in a forgettable moment. Now, each of them felt significant, suspicious, like pieces of a puzzle I didn't yet understand but was somehow already trapped inside. I forced myself to stay still, to not draw attention, to keep my movements slow and deliberate, because the last thing I wanted was to become visible in a way that mattered. But my eyes betrayed me. They moved constantly, scanning, searching, dissecting every detail with the trained instinct of someone who had spent years reading subtle signs of distress, of danger, of things going wrong before anyone else noticed. And now, everything felt like a sign. A man across the aisle tapped his fingers against his armrest in a rhythm so precise it felt mechanical, not restless or distracted like someone killing time, but intentional, controlled, like he was counting something only he could see. Tap, pause, tap, tap, pause. The pattern repeated over and over, steady and unbroken, as if it meant something, as if it was part of something larger. I told myself it was nothing, but my mind didn't believe it. A woman a few rows ahead sat unnaturally still, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed on the seat in front of her, but her lips moved ever so slightly, forming silent numbers or words I couldn't hear, her expression blank in a way that felt practiced, rehearsed, like she was trying too hard to appear calm. Every few seconds, her fingers tightened around the edge of her bag, knuckles paling before relaxing again, as if she were grounding herself, reminding her body to stay under control. Then there was the teenager. He couldn't have been more than 17, maybe younger, his face pale and drawn in a way that didn't belong to someone his age, his arms wrapped tightly around his backpack as if letting go of it, even for a second, would cause something irreversible to happen. His eyes darted around the cabin, not in curiosity, not in boredom, but in fear, raw, unfiltered fear that he couldn't hide no matter how hard he tried. His lips moved occasionally, whispering something under his breath, words that seemed too fast, too desperate to catch, like a prayer spoken by someone who had already lost faith. And then, there was him, the man in the dark coat. At first glance, he was unremarkable, blending into the background in a way that made him easy to overlook, but once I noticed him, once my attention locked onto him, I couldn't look away. He sat with a stillness that felt unnatural, his posture relaxed but not careless, his movements minimal but precise, like every shift of his body had been calculated in advance. His eyes didn't wander like the others, didn't flicker with distraction or uncertainty. They focused, observed, waited. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't even pretending to be either of those things. He was waiting. That realization settled into me slowly, like a drop of cold water sliding down my spine, and with it came something far more unsettling than panic, recognition. Not the kind that comes from memory or familiarity, but the kind that emerges from instinct, from something buried deep within you that understands a truth your mind hasn't fully processed yet. I had seen that look before. Not on planes. Not in everyday life. But in hospital rooms where silence carried more weight than sound, in the hollow eyes of patients who had reached a point beyond fear, beyond hope, beyond anything that resembled resistance. In people who knew they weren't going to survive, and in those who had already accepted it. But there was something different about him, something that made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain, because this wasn't the look of someone waiting for the end. This was the look of someone waiting to begin it. My fingers tightened around the napkin still resting in my lap, the edges now creased from how many times I had folded and unfolded it without realizing, as if the physical act of holding it could anchor me to something real, something certain, something that made sense. Pretend you are sick. Get off this plane immediately. The words no longer felt like a suggestion. They felt like a line, a dividing point between two futures. And suddenly, the weight of that choice pressed down on me with a force I wasn't prepared for, because it wasn't just about leaving or staying, it was about what each option meant, what each path would take from me, what it would leave behind. If I left, I would survive, but I would never know why. I would spend the rest of my life wondering what I had walked away from, what truth I had abandoned, whether I had escaped something real or simply let fear dictate my actions. But if I stayed, I might not get the chance to wonder at all. A quiet, bitter thought surfaced in my mind, one I didn't want to acknowledge but couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about survival. This was about control. Because for the first time since I stepped onto this plane, I realized something that made my pulse quicken in a different way, not with fear, but with a strange, unsettling clarity. Whatever was happening, it wasn't random. And somehow, in a way I couldn't yet understand, I was part of it. I swallowed hard, forcing my breathing to remain steady, forcing my expression to stay neutral even as my thoughts spiraled deeper into something darker, something more dangerous than uncertainty. I told myself I was strong enough to handle the truth, that whatever was waiting beneath the surface, whatever hidden reality was unfolding around me, I could face it, understand it, survive it. But the truth doesn't ask if you're ready. It doesn't wait for permission. And as the plane began to move, slowly at first, then with increasing speed, the distant roar of the engines rising into something louder, something final, I felt it settle in my chest like an unspoken promise. Whatever happened next, there would be no turning back. As the plane began to taxi, my heart started to betray me in ways I had never experienced before. Not with the sharp, immediate panic I had seen in emergency rooms, not with the chaotic surge of adrenaline that forces the body into action, but with something slower, heavier, more insidious, as if it were quietly turning against me from within, each beat no longer a reassurance of life but a reminder that something was deeply, irreversibly wrong. I told myself I was imagining things, that this was nothing more than exhaustion finally catching up to me after months of long shifts, sleepless nights, and the emotional weight of witnessing too much suffering without ever truly processing it. I told myself that my mind, conditioned to expect the worst, was simply projecting danger where there was none, turning ordinary people into threats, turning silence into suspicion, turning coincidence into something far more deliberate than it actually was. I told myself that I was tired, that I needed rest, that once the plane was in the air, once I closed my eyes and let the steady rhythm of the flight lull me into temporary escape, everything would settle back into place, everything would feel normal again. But deep down, beneath the fragile structure of those rationalizations, something in me refused to believe them. Because no matter how hard I tried to dismiss it, the feeling remained. Persistent, unrelenting, like a voice whispering just beyond the reach of my conscious thoughts, repeating the same quiet warning over and over again. Something is wrong. I shifted slightly in my seat, my fingers tightening around the armrest as if grounding myself in something physical could steady the storm building inside my chest, and I forced my gaze forward, determined not to look around anymore, not to feed the growing paranoia that threatened to consume me. If I didn't see anything, then maybe there was nothing to see. But then she came back. The flight attendant. I didn't notice her approach at first, not until I felt her presence beside me, close enough that the faint scent of her perfume, something light, something almost clinical, cut through the recycled air of the cabin. And when I turned my head, just slightly, just enough to acknowledge her without making it obvious, I saw that whatever composure she had been holding on to before was gone. This time, she didn't pretend. There was no practiced smile, no carefully neutral expression designed to reassure passengers and maintain the illusion of normalcy. There was only urgency. She leaned in close, her hand resting lightly on the edge of my seat as if steadying herself. Her movements subtle enough to avoid drawing attention but deliberate enough that I knew this was no accident, no coincidence, no misunderstanding. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely audible, a breath against my ear that sent a sharp chill down my spine. If you stay, you won't survive this flight. The words didn't feel real at first. They hung in the air between us, too heavy, too absolute, as if my mind refused to process them fully, as if acknowledging their meaning would make them true in a way I wasn't ready to accept. There was no hesitation in her tone, no doubt, only certainty. And that certainty was what terrified me the most. Because people hesitate when they're unsure. They soften their words, leave room for interpretation, for error, for the possibility that they might be wrong. But she didn't. She spoke as if she already knew the outcome. As if, in her mind, my fate had already been decided. I wanted to ask her what she meant. I wanted to demand an explanation, to force her to tell me everything she knew, to give me something, anything, that would make sense of what was happening. But I couldn't, because something in her expression stopped me. A silent warning layered beneath the one she had already given. Don't draw attention. Don't react. Don't make this worse. So I stayed silent. And she straightened slowly, her face shifting back into that controlled professional mask as she moved away, continuing down the aisle as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just rewritten the reality I thought I understood. And yet, I still didn't move. I sat there, frozen in place, my body caught between two opposing instincts, one screaming at me to get up, to leave, to do exactly what she had told me before it was too late, and the other holding me back, anchoring me to my seat with a force I couldn't fully explain. Because leaving meant accepting something I wasn't ready to face. It meant admitting that this was real, that the danger wasn't imagined, that I wasn't safe. And more than that, it meant surrendering control. My entire life, I had built myself around the idea that I could handle anything, that no matter how chaotic the situation, no matter how dire the circumstances, I could stay grounded, stay rational, stay in control. It was what made me good at my job. It was what allowed me to stand in the middle of someone else's crisis without breaking. But this was different. Because I wasn't on the outside anymore. I wasn't the observer. I was inside it. And the moment I stood up, the moment I chose to believe her, I would be admitting that I didn't understand what was happening, that I couldn't control it, that my life was now subject to forces I couldn't see, couldn't predict, couldn't fight, that I had been chosen, not randomly, not accidentally, deliberately. The thought settled into my chest like something heavy and suffocating, pressing down on my lungs, making it harder to breathe, harder to think, harder to move. Why me? The question echoed in my mind, over and over again, unanswered and unbearable. Out of everyone on this plane, why me? I glanced down at the napkin still clutched in my hand, the ink slightly smeared now from the moisture of my skin, the words still as urgent and terrifying as they had been the first time I read them. Get off this plane immediately. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because leaving meant stepping into the unknown. And staying, at least felt like something I could understand, even if that understanding was an illusion. I tightened my grip on the armrest, my knuckles turning white as I tried to steady myself, tried to force my breathing into something resembling calm, but it wasn't working. My mind was spiraling, thoughts overlapping, contradicting, breaking apart before they could fully form, and beneath it all, there was a growing sense of inevitability, a quiet, creeping realization that whatever decision I made, it might already be too late. The plane continued to move, the engines growing louder, the subtle vibrations beneath my feet intensifying as we approached the runway, and with each passing second, the weight of my inaction pressed down on me harder, more suffocating than before. I could still stand up. I could still call for help. I could still walk away. But I didn't. Because I told myself one final lie. That if I just waited a little longer, if I just observed a little more, I would understand. And understanding, I believed, would protect me. But as the plane accelerated, as the ground outside the window began to blur, as the moment of no return approached with terrifying certainty, I realized something that sent a cold wave of dread through my entire body. Understanding wouldn't save me. It would only make what came next hurt more. And still, I stayed. The moment the plane turned back toward the terminal, everything changed in a way that felt almost imperceptible at first, like a subtle shift in pressure that your body notices before your mind can give it meaning, a quiet disruption in the rhythm of something that had, until that point, been predictable and controlled. It wasn't announced immediately, not in any clear or alarming way, but you could feel it. The slight alteration in direction, the change in the engine's pitch, the way the forward motion hesitated just long enough to create doubt in the minds of those paying attention. And people started noticing. At first, it was just small things. Passengers glancing out of the windows a little longer than necessary, subtle frowns forming as familiar landmarks reappeared where they shouldn't have been, a few heads tilting in quiet confusion as the unspoken question began to spread from one row to the next. Then came the whispers. Soft at first, almost polite, as if no one wanted to be the first to acknowledge that something was wrong, that this wasn't part of the plan, that something had shifted beneath the surface of what was supposed to be a routine flight. But whispers have a way of growing, feeding off uncertainty, multiplying as they pass from person to person, until the cabin was filled with a low, restless murmur that vibrated with unease. What's happening? Why are we turning around? Did they say something? No one had answers. And that absence of answers was what made the tension snap. It didn't happen all at once, not in a single dramatic moment, but like a wire pulled too tight, stretched beyond its limit until it could no longer hold. And then chaos arrived. A man stood up too quickly, the suddenness of his movement cutting through the fragile stillness like a rupture, his seatbelt still hanging loose at his side as he looked around with wide, searching eyes, as if he expected someone, anyone, to explain what was happening. A bag dropped from the overhead compartment somewhere behind me, the dull, heavy thud echoing louder than it should have, triggering a ripple of startled reactions that spread through the rows like a shockwave. And then a scream. Sharp. Uncontrolled. It cut through the cabin like shattered glass, splintering whatever illusion of normalcy had remained. And in that moment, everything shifted from confusion to fear. I remember the way my body reacted before my mind could catch up, how instinct took over in a way that felt almost separate from thought, as if something deep inside me recognized the danger before I consciously understood it. My pulse surged, fast and erratic, each beat hammering against my ribs with a force that made it hard to breathe, my hands trembling as they gripped the armrests, grounding me in the only solid thing I could find. My vision narrowed. Not completely, not enough to lose awareness, but just enough that the edges of everything blurred, pulling my focus inward, forcing me to concentrate on what mattered most. Survival. This wasn't fear anymore. Fear is hesitation. Fear is uncertainty. This was something else entirely. This was the moment when the body stops asking questions and starts preparing for what comes next. And in the middle of it all, I saw him, the man in the dark coat. While everyone else reacted, while voices rose, movements became erratic, panic spread like wildfire through a confined space, he remained unchanged, untouched by the chaos unfolding around him. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if the tension in the cabin didn't affect him at all, as if he existed outside of it, observing rather than participating. He stood. Not abruptly like the others. Not with confusion or urgency, but with purpose. His eyes moved across the cabin, not wildly, not searching for answers, but calculating, measuring, assessing every reaction, every movement, every shift in energy with a precision that made my stomach tighten. He wasn't surprised. He had been expecting this. That realization hit me harder than anything else, harder than the scream, harder than the sudden surge of panic, because it meant that whatever was happening wasn't unexpected. It was part of something. Something planned. Something controlled. And in that moment, I understood something that hollowed me from the inside out, something so heavy and undeniable that it pushed everything else aside, leaving only a cold, empty clarity in its place. I was never supposed to be on that plane. The thought didn't come as a question. It came as a certainty. A quiet, devastating truth that settled into my chest with a weight I couldn't escape. Someone else was. Someone else had been meant to sit in my seat, to occupy this exact space at this exact moment, to be part of whatever was unfolding now. And somehow, without knowing it, without intending it, I had stepped into that place. I had taken their spot. And whoever they were, They had been the target. My breath caught in my throat, the realization spreading through me like ice, freezing every thought, every attempt to rationalize what was happening, because suddenly, everything made sense in the worst possible way. The napkin, the warning, the urgency in her voice. It hadn't been random. It hadn't been a mistake. It had been specific, directed, meant for me, or rather, meant for the person I was mistaken for. A wave of nausea rolled through me, sharp and disorienting, as the implications of that truth unfolded faster than I could process them, each one more terrifying than the last. If I had stayed in my seat, if I had ignored the warning completely, if I had chosen to do nothing, whatever was meant to happen would have happened to me. A sudden movement snapped my attention back to the present, my gaze locking onto the man in the dark coat as his hand slipped inside his jacket, the motion subtle but unmistakable, and for a split second, the entire world seemed to pause, every sound fading into the background as my body braced for something I couldn't see but somehow knew was coming. This was it. This was the moment everything would break. A voice shouted from somewhere behind me, sharp and commanding, but I couldn't make out the words, couldn't focus on anything except the man, except the slow, controlled way he moved, as if he had all the time in the world, as if nothing about this situation was uncertain for him. Because panic is human. Panic is instinct. Panic is what happens when things spiral out of control. But control in a moment like this, that was something else entirely. That was intent. That was preparation. That was someone who had already decided how this would end. My chest tightened, every muscle in my body tensing as the realization hit its final, unavoidable conclusion. I wasn't just caught in something dangerous. I was at the center of it. And whatever happened next was never meant for me. But now, it was mine. When they opened the overhead compartment above my seat, I felt something inside me collapse. Not suddenly, not violently, but in a slow, irreversible way, like a structure that had been holding itself together through sheer will finally giving in to gravity, folding inward under the weight of a truth it could no longer deny. It wasn't just the sight of what was inside that undid me. It was everything it represented, everything it confirmed, everything it stripped away from the fragile sense of reality I had been clinging to. The device wasn't large. It didn't need to be. It sat there with a quiet, terrifying stillness, compact and deliberate, its surface almost ordinary at a glance, as if it could be mistaken for something harmless by anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. But I knew. Maybe not the technical details, maybe not the exact mechanism or the complexity hidden within it, but I understood enough to feel the full weight of its purpose pressing down on me, suffocating, undeniable. Its presence alone rewrote my entire existence. That was where I was supposed to die. Not dramatically, not in a way that would make sense, but quietly, instantly, erased in a moment that would have been reduced to headlines, to speculation, to explanations that would never fully capture the truth of what had happened, because the truth was never meant to be seen. I stared at it, my mind struggling to process the finality of that realization, the terrifying simplicity of it, how something so small could hold the power to end everything. My life, the lives of everyone around me, the fragile thread of moments that connected me to the people I loved. My legs gave out beneath me, not from weakness, not from fear in the way I had understood it before, but from the unbearable weight of realization, from the crushing awareness that I had been standing on the edge of something irreversible without even knowing it, that I had been seconds, choices, away from becoming nothing more than a memory. Hands reached for me, voices blurred together into something distant and indistinct, but I barely registered them, barely felt the ground beneath me as I sank down, my body no longer responding in ways that made sense, as if it had disconnected from the rest of me in an attempt to protect itself from what my mind was trying to comprehend. I thought about my father, not in a clear, structured way, not as a deliberate memory, but as fragments, moments overlapping and colliding, pieces of a relationship that had always felt unfinished, unresolved. I saw him as he was the last time we spoke, his voice quieter than I remembered, slower, as if something inside him had already begun to fade. I remember the long silences between our conversations, the words we never said, the distance we allowed to grow because neither of us knew how to bridge it. I had told myself there would be time. Time to visit. Time to talk. Time to fix what had been broken. But standing there, no, collapsing there, I realized how fragile that assumption had always been, how easily it could have been taken from me without warning, without closure, without the chance to say anything at all. And suddenly, survival didn't feel like relief. It felt like guilt. A heavy, suffocating guilt that settled deep in my chest, pressing down on me in a way that made it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to exist in the aftermath of what had just been revealed. Why was I spared? The question echoed in my mind, over and over again, louder than the voices around me, louder than the chaos still unfolding in the cabin. Why me? Why did I get a warning when someone else didn't? Because someone else had been meant to sit there. Someone else had been the intended target. Someone else had been supposed to take my place in that moment, to unknowingly step into the path of something designed to end them. And somehow, through nothing more than timing, chance, or something far more deliberate than I could understand, I had taken that place instead. The thought twisted inside me, sharp and unbearable. Had they gotten a warning? Had anyone tried to save them? Or had their fate been sealed long before they even boarded the plane? And the worst question of all, what if I had ignored it completely? What if I had stayed seated, convincing myself that it was nothing, that I was overreacting, that fear had distorted my judgment? What if I had done exactly what I had almost done? The image formed in my mind without permission, vivid and unrelenting. The plane in the air, the quiet normalcy of passengers settling into their routines, the subtle moment when everything would have changed, when the device would have done what it was meant to do, when the world would have shattered in an instant that no one could undo. I saw myself there, in that seat, unaware, unprepared, gone. My breath hitched, my chest tightening as the full weight of that possibility crashed over me, leaving me shaken in a way that no amount of training, no amount of experience could have prepared me for, because this wasn't theoretical, this wasn't something I was witnessing from a distance. This had been real. This had been mine. And I had almost lost everything without even understanding why. The tears didn't come immediately. There was no dramatic release, no sudden breakdown that allowed everything to spill out at once. Instead, there was a strange hollow numbness that settled over me, a quiet detachment that made everything feel distant, as if I were watching it happen to someone else, as if my mind was creating space between me and the reality I wasn't ready to fully accept. The voices around me continued, orders being given, instructions shouted, movements controlled and urgent, but they felt far away, like echoes carried through water, distorted and incomplete. Time blurred. Moments passed without meaning. And then, eventually, later, when it was over, when I was no longer surrounded by chaos, when the noise had faded, when the immediate danger had been contained and replaced with a quiet aftermath of what could have been, that was when it hit me. Not all at once, but slowly, relentlessly, like something seeping into my bones, cold and unyielding, refusing to be ignored any longer. I was alone when it happened, alone with my thoughts, alone with the memory, alone with the truth. And the tears came, not gentle, not controlled, but heavy, uncontrollable, breaking through the numbness with a force that left me shaking, each breath uneven, each sob carrying the weight of everything I had held back in the moment, everything I had been too overwhelmed to feel when it mattered most. I didn't just almost die that day. That would have been easier to process, easier to define, easier to place within the boundaries of something I could understand. What I lost was something far more fundamental. I lost the illusion that life was predictable, that it followed a structure, a pattern, a sequence of events that made sense. I lost the belief that safety was something real, something stable, something that could be trusted. And most of all, I lost the idea that the world was fair, because it wasn't. It had never been. And now, standing on the other side of that realization, I knew something I could never unknow, something that would follow me long after this moment had passed. Survival doesn't mean you're lucky. Sometimes. It just means it wasn't your turn. They told me I was lucky, that I survived, that everything was under control now. They said it with the kind of calm assurance people use when they want to close a door on something too heavy to keep open, as if those words, lucky, safe, over, could neatly contain what had happened, could fold it into something manageable, something that belonged in the past instead of something that had followed me into every quiet moment that came after. But no one tells you what survival actually feels like. No one prepares you for the way it lingers, the way it settles into your body not as relief, but as something far more complicated, something heavier and harder to name. It's not relief. It's not joy. It's not even gratitude in the way people expect it to be. It's a quiet, lingering ache that lives just beneath the surface, constant and unyielding, a subtle shift in the way you exist in the world, as if something fundamental has been altered and can never be returned to what it once was. It's the awareness, sharp and ever-present, that everything can end without warning. That life doesn't ask for permission before it changes. That control was always an illusion. In the days that followed, I couldn't sleep. Not in any real sense. I would close my eyes, exhausted to the point of collapse, my body begging for rest, but the moment I began to drift, the images would return, uninvited, relentless, pulling me back into that cabin, back into that moment, back into the version of myself who had been sitting in that seat, unaware of how close everything was to ending. Every sound became something else. A door closing too hard felt like a signal. Footsteps in the hallway outside my hotel room became something to track, to measure, to anticipate. Even silence felt wrong, like the absence of noise was hiding something I couldn't see. Every stranger became a question. Not a person. Not a passing face in a crowd. But a possibility. A variable. A risk. I found myself watching people the way I had on that plane, analyzing movements, studying expressions, searching for patterns where there were none, as if I could somehow prevent something from happening simply by noticing it first. It was exhausting, and yet I couldn't stop, because once you see how fragile everything is, you can't unsee it. And then there was her, the flight attendant, the woman who had slipped me a napkin and in doing so, had altered the course of my life in a way I would never fully understand. I didn't even know her real name. I didn't know who she was beyond that moment, beyond the fear in her eyes, beyond the quiet urgency in her voice when she chose to warn me instead of looking away. But she stayed with me, in every memory, in every moment of silence, because she had seen something I hadn't. She had looked at me, just another passenger, just another stranger, and decided I was worth saving, before I even believed it myself. That realization unsettled me more than anything else, because it forced me to confront a truth I had spent most of my life avoiding, that I had never really valued my own life in the way I should have, that I had treated it as something expendable, something secondary to everything and everyone else I had dedicated myself to. I had spent years saving others, but I had never stopped to ask whether I believed I deserved the same. And she had answered that question for me, without asking. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity of interviews, statements, and controlled environments where every word I spoke was measured and recorded, they let me leave. Not freely, not completely, but enough. Enough to move. Enough to continue. Enough to face what I had almost lost. The flight to Seattle was arranged again, this time under circumstances that felt nothing like the quiet, hopeful journey I had imagined before, and when I boarded that second plane, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me in a way that made each step heavier than the last. I noticed everything. Too much. Every passenger. Every movement. Every shift in tone or expression. There was no returning to ignorance. No returning to the version of myself who could sit down and believe that everything would be fine simply because it was supposed to be. That version of me no longer existed. And when the plane took off, I didn't close my eyes. I watched. The entire time. When I finally arrived, when my feet touched the ground in Seattle and the cold air filled my lungs, I expected to feel something. Relief, maybe, or closure. But instead, there was only that same quiet ache, that same awareness that nothing had truly ended. Something had only begun. The drive to my father's house felt longer than it should have, each mile stretching into something almost surreal, as if I were moving through a reality that didn't quite belong to me anymore. And when I finally stood in front of his door, my hand hovering just inches away from knocking, I hesitated. Not because I was afraid of him, but because I was afraid of what this moment meant. Because I understood now, in a way I never had before, how easily it could have been taken from me. How easily this could have never happened at all. I knocked. The sound echoed louder than it should have. And then, the door opened. He stood there, thinner than I remembered, older in a way that time alone couldn't explain, his eyes widening as they met mine, confusion flickering for a brief second before recognition settled in, followed by something else. Emotion. Raw. Unfiltered. His lips parted, as if he wanted to say something, but no words came. And then he cried. Not quietly, not with restraint, but openly, visibly, in a way I had never seen before, as if something inside him had finally broken free, something he had been holding back for years without even realizing it. And for the first time in years, so did I. Not because I was scared, not because of what had happened, but because, in that moment, standing there in front of him, feeling the weight of everything I had almost lost pressing against the reality of what I still had, I finally understood something I had spent my whole life avoiding. We don't get time. We think we do. We plan around it. We delay things, postpone conversations, convince ourselves that there will always be another chance, another moment, another day to say what we didn't say today. But we don't. We get moments. Fragile. Unpredictable. Irreplaceable moments that exist only once and then disappear forever. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one warning, one decision, to either lose everything, or finally start living. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't hesitate. I didn't hold back. I didn't wait. Because now I knew. Waiting is the most dangerous choice of all.